Hereby, I open this academic ceremony in which Justine Goris will defend her academic thesis, Aligning Attention Bias for Pain Information with Context Changes and Goal Pursuit, an Experimental Approach. May I invite you to present a summary of your study and conclusions of your thesis.
Dear Prorector, a member of the Assessment Committee, supervisor, colleague, friends, and family, thank you for being here today. And I will give you some insight into my thesis work, which is focused on attention in the context of pain. So if we take Pam, for example, who's a 42-year-old woman, a few years ago, she had a bicycle accident and she injured her back. At first, the pain was mild and it will go away with rest and painkiller. This is what we call acute pain. However, for Pam, even after the injury healed, the pain remained constant and it became a real burden in her life. This is what we call chronic pain. There's different mechanisms at play here, but the one we're going to focus on is attention bias. Attention bias is the tendency to focus on pain-related information at the cost of other information in the environment. Attention bias has been extensively studied over the past few years and is believed to play a key role in the development and maintenance of chronic pain. However, recently there was a few meta-analyses that showed there was quite some mixed finding across studies with very small effect size. So what came out of it is that we need a methodological and conceptual revision of attention bias. This thesis addresses gaps by basing itself on the functional contextual framework, which state that attention bias is not maladaptive and stable threat, but is rather functional and dynamic. So if we go back to Pam, for example, she learned over the years that if she would do some relaxation exercise, she would cope better with the pain. So one day after a long day, she would just relax in her chair and focusing on the tension in her body and on her pain, because the context asked her to focus on that. But what if all of a sudden her kid would fail, and at that moment focusing on the pain won't be harmful, and that she will go and see how her kid is doing? So the magnitude of attention bias is really more dependent upon the context. So this leads to the research question that we have, is that to which extent do people align the attention bias with context change? Does the ability to align attention bias with context change rather than attention bias itself impact upon pain outcomes? And do change in goal pursuit, for example, the aim to control pain, will impact upon the ability to align attention bias? So the first study what we did is a dot probe task. It's a computer task that uses symbolic pain stimuli such as words. Here it's word pain-related and neutral word. To investigate the flexibility of attention bias, we did a training towards and away from pain information. And we assess as well pain outcomes, which is experimental pain outcomes and self-report pain. Results are partially supported because the first study that we didn't find any link between flexibility in attention bias and experimental pain outcomes in the healthy samples. But the second study, we did find flexibility in attention bias, predicting self-report pain disability in the chronic pain population. This task has quite some low ecological validity as it uses symbolic stimuli such as words, and words might be not the best suited stimuli to capture attention in a pain context. So we decided to create a new design, which is VR-based approach and use bodily sensation. This is the pain flex paradigm, and based on previous study, as seen before, is that people will have a higher focus towards an object approaching towards them, and that people will focus on a threat location where they feel, where a location that is threatened by pain. Sorry. And in addition to these two components, we wanted to investigate the context here, which we created a safe and a threat context. So this paradigm allows us to investigate attentional bias and attentional bias alignment. In addition, we did another task to assess pain outcomes, which is, we call the cold pressor, which is with the cold pressor task, where it's a task where people have to put their hands into cold water for 1 minute while listening to tones through a headphones, and they have to press a button every time they hear a tone. So we expected that alignment would be predictive of pain outcomes. So what we expected for the first study is that people will focus on what's approaching towards them, people will have higher attention in the threat body location for the threat context, and that people will align the attentional bias within the context. So first, as you can see, is that in the safe context, there's a form of congruency effect where people do focus on what's approaching towards them linked to the body location. We didn't find any attentional bias in the threat context. However, we can see that for the body threat location, the congruency effect is impacted by threat. So there's a form of alignment here, which is partially. Following this study, we wanted to investigate it if we implemented a goal here, which is the goal to, so we did a third study with 2 groups. One group who has control over pain, control over pain, and one group who has no control over pain. Again, we had another task here to assess pain outcomes, which is also the cold pressor task. We had the same expectation, is that people will focus on what's approaching towards them, people will align within the context, and there will be a better alignment for people in the pain control group. So first of all, in the safe context, as you can see, the congruency effect is still present. And again, if we look at the threat context, there's a replication of previous finding, which is we don't really find this attentional bias, but we do find that people for the body threat location align the attention because they don't really differentiate of which side the object is approaching. Unfortunately, we didn't find any group effect here. So all the studies are based on indirect measure of attention, such as accuracy and reaction time, and we wanted to have a more direct measure of attention. So we used, in another study, we also investigate attentional bias and alignment within the same paradigm. We used the EEG, which is a cap that people put on their head with electrodes that record brain activity that are linked with attention. In addition, we had another task that measured pain outcomes, which is also the cold pressor task. For this study, we also had the same expectation as people will focus on what's approaching towards them, that people will have a higher attention in the threat body location, and that people will align within the context. So for the result that we have here is that we see a similar congruency effect for the safe context. We see here a attentional bias where people do have higher attention toward the threat body location and then higher attention in the threat context. Unfortunately, attentional bias alignment is not as clear here as the behavioral studies. One of the reasons could be here is that because in this task, as opposite to previous tasks, where previous tasks people had to respond where they felt the tactile stimuli, in this task people were asked to just sit and observe what's happening. So this may be why there's no alignment with context. So, in conclusion, we can see that this thesis does challenge the traditional view of attentional bias by that being maladaptive or stable, actually, because we can see that attentional bias does depend upon the context, which is threat or versus safe context. Unfortunately, we didn't find that attentional bias would depend on goal pursuit. We did fail to find the effect of group, but does it show some partial alignment for context and attentional bias? And unfortunately, in all the studies that we find there was no predictive value of attentional bias that would predict worse pain outcomes. So this thesis is a novel work, and it's the first step, and it needs improvement. So as a future direction, it could be that we could manipulate the different threat level of the threatening, manipulate from different threat level in the threat context, such as a high threat group and a low threat group, and see how attentional bias alignment will be impacted. Or we can, if we base ourselves on the functional contextual framework, it states that attentional bias is actually interrelated with other cognitive bias, such as interpretation bias and memory bias. So it will be interesting to investigate them together in the paradigm. Also, the pain interference that we investigated here, we did it as a second task, but maybe if we assess pain interference within the paradigm, the result might be different, and there will be actually a predictive value of attentional bias alignment. And also, one thing here is that we did all the studies on healthy samples, which makes it hard to generalize to chronic pain population. So it would be interesting to investigate it, the chronic pain population with this paradigm. Thank you very much, everyone, for your attention. And now I give back the words to the prorector.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. The opposition will be opened by Professor Vlaaien, who is an emeritus professor of the psychology of bodily distress. Professor Vlaaien, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Prorector. Dear candidate, I would like to compliment you with an outstanding thesis. This is not really my field of research expertise in the pain area, so I was really pleased to read and to learn about attentional bias and related concepts. You have introduced a dynamic and motivational perspective on pain-related attentional bias, and also the need for increased ecological validity, which is very novel, I think. Your studies investigated alignment of attentional bias with changing contextual features using the newly developed virtual reality PainFlex paradigm. You presented a number of sophisticated and elegantly designed experiments, and I wish to congratulate you, and of course also your team, Marlon Peters and Dimitri van Rijkegem. You did not find support for all of your hypotheses, I saw, but and you suggest some other adjustments. But I would say that's fine. I mean, it's not because you don't find all of the hypotheses supported that you should abandon this kind of research. I think personally, maybe you have a different idea. I don't know. But I still have some questions. Let me first start with the first question. That is, I was a little bit puzzled by your statement on page 111, which says, this doctoral thesis addresses a gap by investigating two key aspects of attentional bias dynamics. And you say attentional bias malleability, AM, and attention bias alignment, AB align. Now, the conceptual difference between both key is a bit obscure to me. I see a lot of overlap, as you say that alignment is redirecting attention away from pain in non-threatening environments, or adjusting attentional preferences to changing environments. I don't see a real conceptual difference between both. Could you please help me in understanding both key concepts?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your feedback and question. So yeah, malleability, the way we investigate it, so it's also dynamic and attentional bias, but it's flexibility, but we investigate it by using different contingencies, such as training away and towards pain-related, and attentional bias alignment, the way we investigated was through context change, so threat versus safe context. So that's the difference we use, is like contingencies and context. And both show some dynamic and attentional bias. a bit clear or not.
So in both cases, it's a kind of flexibility, but depending on whether it's context or goals. Is that?
No, context and goals will be the attention bias alignments,
Okay.
and contingencies.
Contingencies, right?
Yeah, would be more malleability in that
Okay.
context. Or in that, yeah. And be like factors, we can say as well, different factors, or for current. Because I said in the first study, like for example, one of the reasons we think we didn't find result for the healthy samples is that they don't have prolonged stress factors, and as chronic pain patients do have prolonged stress factor. So this is more the difference that we made in the way we saw it.
Right. And if I understand you well, it's more about a gradient of alignment and malleability rather than a yes or no.
A what?
Like a gradient, there's a degree of alignment, or do you say, well, there is alignment or there is no alignment? It's a dichotomous.
It's a magnitude, let's say, for alignment itself. Yes. Yeah, I think it's the magnitude of the context, of the person itself, of the goal that people have. I think it's an interaction of different things in one person's context. So it's not yes or no. It's about, do people in that context have more alignment with attention bias? Do people maybe with chronic pain have more misalignment, depending on which context they are in? It's very...
that makes a lot of sense, indeed, yeah. My next question is more about the fault. So you tested alignment, and sometimes you find it, sometimes you did not find it. An interesting question would also be, is there a possibility to experimentally manipulate or introduce a manipulation to improve alignment?
In the study that we did now?
Or in the next study, in
the next study, how we can improve alignment?
Yes. Would there be a specific, that is related to the conceptual definition of what you call alignment? Mm-hmm. Something, because that might be interesting if you know how to manipulate it.
The alignment.
You might maybe translate it later on in a clinical. But my question is more about the experimental one. So how to experimentally introduce a manipulation that you expect to increase the alignment?
Well, I guess I would change the context. So I would be using the VR as well, but put the context with a garden and doing like really interact with the context. Now to see how people would align, so with a threat as well, so there would be a threatening maybe object in the environment and a safe also, but if we be really changing maybe a garden or a kitchen or something like that. And I think that will be interesting to see how people will align the attentional bias within this neutral, but also maybe, because when you cook, you have to move around and do some stuff, so maybe see how alignment would be, the alignment of attentional bias would be impacted in those different contexts, or maybe also because we didn't find any predictive value with pain outcomes. Mm-hmm. So maybe very interesting first to maybe assess pain outcomes in the VR design.
So an increased engagement with the context, you would predict it would increase the attentional bias alignment. That's interesting.
I think so, but it's a possibility.
Do I have time for another? Yeah, okay. Right. Yes, maybe a question about this new paradigm, the pain flex paradigm. So with the CS being a movement, right? Yeah. With the pen, which has a very strong ecological value. It also focuses on a causal contingency. It's like the pen causing pain, which is different than other paradigms, which is interesting. At the same time, you mentioned somewhere that there might be also some drawbacks using this paradigm.
Well, I would say because it's very, it's a bit complex, because we do analyze the object approaching, so the movement, but we also analyze in which side the object is approaching, and we also analyze the body location and with the context. So I think it did improve the ecological validity, but also it make it more complex for analyzing what people really felt at that moment, because it's statistical analysis, obviously, but There's also very much interindividuality differences between people, which is normal. But here again, it's a healthy sample, so it's. But so yeah, that's why I would say it's a good thing, but also very complex for the analysis itself. Or yeah, it's a question that we had also during the discussion, and we wrote is like maybe the complexity make it a bit more challenging to really understand everything that's happening within this design.
Okay, so ecological validity also comes with a cost,
Yeah.
the cost of complexity. And could that have been influenced the results as well?
Maybe, but yeah, maybe, but we did change a bit. You know, we did the pain flex itself, but we did with gold, and then we did with the EEG, and we do find kind of similar pattern of result throughout the study with bigger sample. The first study was 38, and then 45, and then 75. So we can see that it's quite robust also result because we do find a similar pattern. It was, I mean, previous findings, like findings repeat itself across the studies.
Right.
With the congruency effect, with the alignment. Maybe the EEG we didn't find alignment as such, but we did find a partial bit alignment with the P200. So, so yeah.
Okay. I will give. Is there still one more?
You still have some time.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Maybe in chapter 3, your analysis showed that the AB and attention bias and attention bias alignment did not predict any of the pain outcomes. But I think it's not just chapter 3. There was other.
Sorry.
They did not predict pain outcomes. Yeah. Isn't that problematic for the whole theory of attentional bias? Because is that not one of the key relationships that would
it could
underlie the whole idea of attentional bias?
I wouldn't. Yeah, it's true that we didn't find any result here, and that we can't really confirm that it's related to pain outcomes. But it does. Yeah. So that's why I think it would be maybe better to do to investigate the pain outcomes within the same design instead to have a different task where people maybe can, because they did the pain flex and then they do another task, so it may be the change between the two tasks, or maybe they're not related, or maybe people, well, I don't know, because previous findings have saw that in previous research that there's a link between attention bias and pain outcomes using the CBT task. So I guess, yeah, I would, I don't think it's problematic in itself because we do find this alignment within context, and there's also pain stimuli within the pain flex paradigm. We didn't analyze the pain stimuli because we measure accuracy, but we analyze threat context and safe context and threat body location and safe body location. So I think it would be first interesting to investigate the pain outcomes within the VR paradigm.
But that would increase complexity?
It would. But maybe it would be very interesting results.
Okay.
I don't know, maybe not, but I think it's worth to look deeper into it.
Thank you very much. I give the word back to the pro-rector. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Flyer. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Heathcote, who is a senior lecturer in health psychology at King's College in London in the UK. Dr. Heathcote, please go ahead.
Dear candidate, congratulations on an excellent thesis. You present a very coherent series of studies which really nicely build on each other. And your studies are all very well grounded in pain psychology theory, which is lovely to see. I know one of your goals, you talked about it here and in your thesis, was to advance the methods through which we understand how the way we pay attention to pain is relevant, and I think it's clear that your work has done that, even within your thesis, sort of moving from a simple dot probe task to a much more complex virtual reality paradigm. So almost regardless of some of your findings, I think the methodological development has been very impressive and will support the field moving forward. So congratulations. So my first question is that you talked today, actually, and in your thesis, about conflicting results in the literature as a whole. You know, many studies finding evidence that attention bias is relevant for pain, others not. Do you think that your findings help to resolve any of these conflicting results, and if so, how?
As to my opponent, thank you for your feedback and question. I think in a method point of view, maybe it helped a bit to use VR for future research and for different, not especially using the pain flex paradigm, but using VR as it for different tasks. So yeah, I think that, but I think also maybe it brought maybe more questions, but that could be interesting to see, to actually investigate, maybe move from the attention bias as being very stable, maybe move to maybe alignment or flexibility in attention bias. So I think, yeah, it did raise some questions and show some complexity in this attention bias anyway. So yeah, I think, yeah.
I wonder, one of your sort of propositions is that by having a more dynamic view of attention bias, you might help to resolve some of those conflicts. Maybe the fact that it's a dynamic thing is the reason why we see it in some studies in more static environments, but not others. Do you still feel like your findings would suggest that that's the case? That might be the reason why we have conflicting results in the literature?
Because we have static stimuli. Yeah, I would say that. I would say, and also different meta-analyses state that as well, that static stimuli might be not the best suited for pain, because I think, yeah, words or faces might be not the more ecological stimuli, because in everyday life, object approaching or different contexts might be like having, the world is dynamic anyway, so having a more dynamic setup of stimuli would be, I think, yeah, it would help improve research. I'm not saying that that is the thing to use, but I think, yeah, we should definitely try to use at least bodily sensation and dynamic and moving object and context change for future investigation in attention bias in the pain literature. Yeah.
Okay. My next question builds a little on that, and also something that Professor Vlein said. So you do have mixed findings across your study. You also clearly talked about that today. One question we have as scientists is, when do we abandon our hypotheses or even abandon our theories? Taking all of your findings together, I wonder, do you think it's time to abandon our theory that attention bias is relevant for pain? And if not, I wonder what would convince you to abandon that theory?
I'm not ready to abandon the theory yet. I still think, well, maybe not. I think maybe attention bias malleability or the flexibility in attention bias is still worth investigating anyway, because we do know attention do play a role in people's life anyway, but also for chronic pain patients. So I think I would like to investigate further on that, obviously improve the methodology as well, and maybe just focus on alignment in attention bias, following further than attention bias. But yeah, so I would, but I'm not sure what would make me abandon, yes, my theory.
Yeah, maybe sometimes another way to ask that question is, do you feel like there's a way you could change your experiment that would actually help to disprove the hypothesis rather than just to try and prove it?
Yeah, I didn't thought of that. What would disprove? I guess because now we only did 3 studies on it, I guess if I, for example, assess pain outcomes within the design or manipulate threat level or add another goal which is not pain related, and I see that the result doesn't really change or replicate what we found, I think at that moment I would feel like we need to move from that and maybe have another direction. I'm not sure which one yet, but yeah, I would say the replication of, if we do more studies and research on that and it's still the same,
yeah, more evidence. Great. So my next question, you had a question a little bit around how you might experimentally manipulate attention bias alignment. I wonder, thinking in a clinical context, have you thought about what clinicians might do in the clinic to change attention bias alignment in a more positive way?
I think in a clinical point of view, I would think focus on goal management. I think that's very important, and it has a huge role as well for people. And I would try to use the VR if possible, because I know it can become complex, but in therapy, and try to create different contexts and kind of, I would tailor a bit the context. We'll have different contexts ready anyway beforehand, and have a bit of discussion with a patient about their goal and manageable goal, flexibility, and then try to use different contexts within it with the patient, and see how we align his attention, not really doing experimental work, but really see how we interact with the VR and how it can improve maybe if he's in the threat context or safe context, how will be the impact in his everyday life. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a strength of having more ecologically valid methods is maybe they can translate directly into the clinic. If I still have some time. Yes. I have a broad question for you, which is how has your thinking about pain science as a whole changed across the course of your PhD?
From when I started? I think, I learned hugely, but also I think it's a very complex field. It's a lot of studies that validate something, and then other studies that says the opposite, or studies rarely find directly what they expected, and it's a very trying to understand with different, also because there's attention, but there's also different individuality in it, like anxiety or depression or fatigue or a different emotional state within a person. And I think it's a complex but very fascinating. I think I learned a lot, and I really, it was challenging, but I enjoyed it. And I still enjoy today reading, but articles, yeah.
Okay. Do I have, I'm done.
If you have one minor question that is still possible, a short question and a short answer.
You talked about several theories in your introduction: the fear avoidance model, schema enmeshment model, threat interpretation model. Which model do you feel like your findings best support?
I think the motivation model from Stefan van Dam, but also the neurocognitive model from Valérie Legrand. I think both of them, I would, For me, it's,
Thank you.
Okay, now we have to move to the next opponent. Next opponent will be Professor Keogh, who is a professor of psychology from the University of Bath in the UK. Please go ahead.
Thank you, dear candidate. I will start by saying thank you, because I thought it was an excellent thesis and it was a pleasure to read. So thank you very much for making my job very easy. Okay, it was a pleasure because, partly because also my background actually was, my PhD was on attentional biases and anxiety. over 20 years ago, and it's really interesting to see how things have developed. And also I can position what you've done and place that in the context of the contribution you clearly are making to the field and helping push that forward. So congratulations. It was certainly, as others have said, sophisticated, well-designed, thought-provoking studies, well-constructed, etc. There's a lot of innovation here. So again, thank you and congratulations. Of course, I have some questions. And actually, because of my PhD background, was actually looking at state and trait effects. And of course, a key sort of theme that emerged through the thesis in your presentation today was very much to talk about the sort of contextual side of things. And to some extent, I felt you were sort of moving away from the notion of trait effects. And I just wondered whether it's too soon to do that, and what role, if anything, do trait effects have in the sort of work you're doing?
Highly esteemed candidate, thank you. Opponent, sorry. Thank you for your feedback and question. You mean the training effect of the dot probe that we did?
We're talking about functional contextual and saying that these are very flexible and they change depending on the state you're in, the situation you're in.
Yeah.
But we do have predispositions, so I might be somebody who's spider phobic, but it's only when I'm presented with a spider will I actually elicit those sorts of biases. In any other context, it doesn't matter. So something about my trait predisposition is important. I wondered why you didn't look at that as much.
Well, yeah, but we did have some questionnaire. So we did check for anxiety, for, like I said, depression, and tried to have, and looked at correlation-wise, if there was a correlation. We didn't find any results, unfortunately. So I think definitely anxiety will have, or different traits like predisposed would, but how you're thinking, yeah, it will have an impact. But I think because the sample we used, it's just healthy, so they quite had low level of anxiety, of depression, of stress. And I think in a chronic pain population, it will be, hopefully, there will be more link with that and some predisposition. And like I said, it maybe have a better kind of a tailored context for people who have a higher fear of hospital or needles or a different thing. And yeah, that would be interesting to investigate, and it's a very interesting point as well, and it's very true.
And I also appreciate there's only so much you can do, and you had complex studies. You have to stop at some point, so it's just challenging that idea. My second question then is really thinking about that sort of more contextual side, the contextual demands that we find ourselves in, and those internal motivational goals. And you're presenting, obviously your work has looked at both of these, and I'm sort of thinking, well, what happens when they collide? What happens when the context is inconsistent with the underpinning goals? Did you think about the interactions that potentially occur, between context and goals, and what effect that might have on pain?
And you mean so if we see an interaction between the goal to control pain and the context?
Or it's the things that might affect how I process pain may depend upon the external environment, the external context, but also my internal state. I'm just wondering when the two don't quite align, what happens?
Well, if I look at my study, I think the aim to control pain, why it didn't work, for example, could be many reasons. Could be that it's maybe something more related to chronic pain people because they have, over a long time, they try to control their pain and they can't really. So maybe it didn't work on the healthy samples, or maybe the manipulation with it didn't work. Could be. Could be. I don't think, but it could be. I think maybe the context that we did, it was very neutral context, and maybe it had an impact as well because it was a pen, but they still had a tone and had to press a pedal. Yeah, we didn't see any difference between the reaction time of pressing the pedal or error rates between the pedals. So I think both student group did quite well. So it's very interesting, and I don't really have an answer like this.
Oh, no, that's fine.
It's a very interesting point, but yeah, it's just because previous studies have shown that aiming to control pain does have an impact, but not our study. So.
Oh yeah, and these challenges are meant to be challenged. These questions are challenging to think around that. I guess another one is really around the translational side. I mean, I was, again, really taken, as were others, around the way you looked at what happens in the real world and then bring that back into the lab, that ecological validity side of things. And so I suppose I'm going to reverse that and go, well, okay, so, and you touched on this at the end in your final chapter around the potential implications. Just ask you to elaborate a little bit more on what you see the core potential implications are for how we might manage pain.
For the clinical population, or just in general?
General.
General, okay. How this VR, the ecological value?
Or more from your results that you've around attention, what would the implications be from what you found to what we might do?
What would be what? Sorry, I didn't get.
The results from your studies,
Yeah.
what would the implications be in the context of how we manage pain?
Well, I think from the result we have is that I would suggest now to really take into account contextual cue. And even though our goal here didn't really show something, I think it's still very important because people's goal has a huge place in people's life, so I think in that point of view, today, I would go for really trying to understand how context impacted upon, or attention bias is impacted upon the different contexts that someone is in. So that'd be interesting to investigate further, obviously, but now from the result will be in the general, because it's quite, VR is close to real life, so I think it's safe to say that different contexts would impact attention bias. So yeah, that would be my conclusion kind of it.
Completely agree. Good. Do I have time for another? Or?
A very short question and a very short answer.
I'll stop then. My next one might be a little bit longer.
Okay, thank you. We go to the next opponent, and that is Dr. Rachel Schauerman, who is a postdoctoral research in health psychology at this university. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Pro-Rector. Well, dear candidate, first I'd like to congratulate you with your thesis. It was really a pleasure to read. And I was also very much intrigued by the experiment that you presented, where you developed a new experimental paradigm and using virtual reality. So I imagine that must have cost lots of work, thought, and effort. So really my compliments for that. And my question also relates to this paradigm that you described in 3 of your chapters, this pain flex task. And it was a little bit complex. There were a lot of elements in there. But you established a paradigm that allowed you to test, complex interactions between threat, pain location, and also task performance, resulting in pain-related attention biases. And what you expected, for example, in your second study, is an increased focus on pain location and better tactile discrimination there when the context signaled pain or threat of pain compared to a safe context. And you also expected this in the eye gaze data, but also in accuracy. And your hypothesis there was also very much directed, like in the context of pain. So when I was looking at your results, I was actually a little bit puzzled because what I saw, or what it seemed like, is that not in the context of pain this accuracy for the pain location was increased, but instead it was increased for the safe context. And what you see is that when it's congruent, so when the approach location and the tactile location, there you see very strong effects in all your studies in better accuracy. So I was wondering a little bit, because you had a directed hypothesis and you were very careful in your wording with rejecting the hypothesis, and you said partially confirmed. I was wondering what made you not reject the hypothesis that it's the pain context that increases this higher accuracy.
Esteemed candidate, thank you for your feedback and question. What you mean is the alignment. Why did I not reject? Because I said it's partial alignment. Mm-hmm. Because we do find a three-way interaction, as we expected, that would show alignment. So in statistical point of view, we show alignment. And also because we see this congruency effect is present, especially in the safe context. But the three-way interaction in the threat context will be that people with focus have more vigilance towards the body threat location, pain location, where you can see that people quite have the similar result no matter which side is approached, meaning that only when they know where they're going to receive pain, they kind of shift the attention between which side is approached, no matter if it's a threat side or a non-threat side, but only in the threat context. So I think pain intubation will impact task performance, but it does see some partial alignment because we expected an overall accuracy. But we can see that people have aligned within the context. They don't generalize it to the safe context where they really focus more on very where it's congruent. Like if I touch right and I feel right, I will say it's right. So this is how we think, that's how we saw alignment. And also when I rejected the overall attention bias is because we didn't really find an effect of the threat location, the threat body location in the threat context as itself. And rather we find more interaction that show, that's why we think it's more partial alignment here.
Okay, yeah. And would you then also say, because this in the safe context, would you say we need to pay more attention to that as well, like the safety signals? Do you think that's important?
I'm not sure exactly, because people in self-report manipulation measurement where we had, people did say that they have more attention towards the threat context than the safe context, and they have more anxiety toward the threat context as well. So I think in the safe context, they were just focusing obviously on what's approaching towards them because it's a moving object. But I think, yeah, maybe they felt the tactile stimuli on the congruent side and maybe paid less attention if it was incongruent because they were in safe context. It could be, yeah. But I know that self-reportedly, people would say that they paid less attention in the safe context.
Okay. And then maybe another question about the eye tracking data or the eye gaze data. There, what I noticed is that consistently you didn't find any results there, so it was not related to your tasks. So would you say, or what would you say, how these different measures relate? Are they measuring similar things in relation to attention, or would you say, well, we don't need the eye tracking, or what is like the add-on of including it? Or would you tweak something?
I believe it's necessary to include it because it's a form of a direct measure of attention, and I think it's very interesting in different studies that we saw that eye tracking has interesting results. So I think we shouldn't remove it. I think the way we use it might be not the best because it's a moving object, and so people might have just look at the hands and we did analyze peripheral vision as well. So maybe if we see if the people just look at the moving object or at the hand or something, I think the way we use eye tracking, we need to have some more measure to implement, more measure, I would say, in the eye tracking to see how attention and if they focus more on the pain threat location or on the safe location to see how it yeah, what could it bring? I don't know what it would be, but I think, yeah, the way we need to have more measure of eye tracking, because it didn't show any results in all of the studies, but I think it would be interesting.
Okay. So you say if you measure it in a different way, do the analysis differently, set up your experiment. Yeah, it's of value. Okay. Well, I also had a small methodological question. That's okay. So I noticed that in your virtual reality paradigm, for example, also in study 3, you did a general, or constructed a general linear mixed model, and you did that multiple times. So first you focused only on CS plus responding, so on a subset of your data basically, and then you run a full model on your full sample. And I was just wondering whether you needed to compare, or whether there's a need to compare for multiple comparison in this case, or what the reason would be to not do that.
Yeah, so multiple comparison, you mean to check, yeah, if the result will be still present, because we test multiple times. I think, yeah, because we did it for the malleability study. So, yeah, maybe that would be something that we should do to see if there's still significant results. I'm not exactly how it works with the general linear mixed model, because I learned it during my PhD. It's a very complex. Yeah, I would say, yeah, to be very statistically correct, maybe test for multiple test correction to see if still results are significant. But because we saw it in all the different studies, I think it's safe to say that the replication is quite present with different sample size. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now we move to the next opponent, who will be joining us online. And the next opponent is Professor Vögele, who is a professor of clinical health psychology at the University of Luxembourg. Professor Vögele.
Thank you very much. The candidate, I would also like to start with congratulating you on conducting a very systematic series of well-controlled laboratory studies. Very impressive. Also the fact that you used a range of relevant assessment methods, including psychophysiology. So this is very impressive. I do have a few questions, as you may guess, and the first one, more at a conceptual level, because I'm pretty familiar with the actual experimental setups. My first question is relates to the concept of interoception. In the various models that you refer to in your thesis, pain is conceptualized as a somatosensory phenomenon. There are other somatosensory sensations also. If they come from the visceral organs, one usually summarizes them under the general concept of interoception. To what extent do you think is the perception of pain and related cognitive processes similar to or different from the interoception of, let us say, cardiac activity?
A highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your feedback and question. So do you mean what would be the difference between the pain stimuli I used and what was I didn't?
Not necessarily the pain stimuli. I'd like to enter a discussion with you more at a conceptual level. I mean, you discuss various models of what pain is, and therefore you show the necessity to further investigate cognitive processes, for example, attentional bias, that may be involved in chronic pain. Now, pain, as these models all say, is a perception, a perceptual phenomenon, which comes from the body. But there are other somatosensory sensations, not necessarily pain. the perception of heartbeat, the perception of sweat, the perception of breathing, which are all generally summarized under the concept of interoception. I would like to hear your thoughts as to whether you think that pain perception is similar or different from the perception of these other physical symptoms.
Well, I think both will draw attention. If your heart beats faster or if you cut your hands, they will directly capture attention because the body wants to prevent injury, for example. I think maybe the difference here would be if your heartbeat, we'll just say, for example, the introspective heartbeat, if it beats a bit faster, you will maybe calm you down and try to breathe. But if you have massive chest pain, that would be a sign of heart attack. Then at that moment, you want to protect your body completely and call an ambulance. Or I think the difference would be the urgency to react and how attention, because they both capture attention, but one is maybe more, but they're both body protective. But I think the urgency would be my point of view in this. But it's a very interesting question.
Yeah, I think probably for how. Sorry?
I didn't say it.
There may be, I have an echo, that's why. Sorry, I hear myself. You may be right for healthy participants, but if you've ever come across a person with diagnosed panic disorder who experiences their heartbeat, you may find very similar responses in terms of immediate thoughts of imminent threat and danger. So that actually leads me to my next question, which revolves around the concept of chronic pain. Most of your studies involved healthy participants, correct?
I didn't hear that.
Most of your participants involved healthy individuals, correct? In study 2, you had a sample of chronic pain patients, but they were only tested online, correct? So they did not take part in the actual experiments. Do you think that testing chronic pain patients with the same paradigms would have given you any different results?
Could be, but so they respond to a self-report questionnaire with pain disability, pain interference, and healthy population did as well. But we measure pain outcomes more. But because also it was COVID, it was not possible for test chronic pain patient.
Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I'm aware, and I'm not criticizing it. I'd like you again to come up with me onto a higher level of discussion here so that we can consider where the limitations of your research are. I'd like to elaborate together with you whether chronic pain patients may be an altogether very different lot compared to your healthy participants.
The higher conversation, yeah. So, what would be why there is the difference? You mean between the two groups, between the blocks?
Oh. Well, I think in one of your earlier answers, you referred to the possibility that, or in your presentation, that when people have chronic pain, and they may have had pain for very many years, I think in your subsample in study 2, on average, I think they reported 10 years of having lived with the chronic pain. There are all sorts of processes that have been shown to happen, some of them being adaptive, some of them being maladaptive. One of the maladaptive ones are that chronic pain patients show a much higher incidence of comorbid mental conditions, for example. So have you thought about what your results mean if you reflect them on a population that you were not able to test for very understandable reasons? But of course, you know, we would like to see some of your results. At least we have to make assumptions as to how they would translate into clinical practice. And when we talk about clinical practice, we mean the application of some of your results in a clinical context, i.e. to people who may have a range of mental disorders in addition to their chronic pain.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I think anxiety and depression is very linked as well with chronic pain. Yeah, I think to really find the link with attention bias here would be interesting to see how, because attention bias in anxiety literature is also very much studied and is more clear, I would say, in the anxiety literature than in the pain one. But as we know, chronic pain and anxiety are very linked as well. So I think that's something that to take into account as well for translating into the clinical using, because I'm using very healthy samples that are
Justine Goris, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense, and I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return in this room.
Please arise.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side. 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Take the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you've won the battle once you've grown. South side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Justine Goris, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taken into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. And Professor Peters is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom, and I invite your supervisor to take the floor.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent and responsible?
Yes.
Yes, I promise.
Yes, I promise, sorry.
By the authority vested in us by the law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Justine Goris, the degree of doctor and grant you all the rights attached to custom and law. And as evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary and the other members of the committee and affixed with the official seal of the university. And I now give the floor to the co-promoter.
Okay. Dear Justine, I also have some words to say. I'm really happy to give this laudatio in name of Madelon and myself. I'm very pleased that we stand here today. This is time for celebration, but also for reflection. Celebrating we'll do in a minute, but first some reflection. And actually I would like to start this reflection by thanking the funding organization also for funding your PhD, but also Klaus Vögele, without whom this PhD would actually never have been taking place. So also thank you to you, Klaus, for helping in facilitating this PhD in any way possible. So thank you for that. Yet, now back to you. My memory actually goes back to the moment I was granted a core junior research grant at Luxembourg. And for this project, we were looking for a student who would be working for 2 years on this project. 2 years become 4 years. And we were not just looking for a student, we were looking for a student who could work independent and who would also be good in problem solving, as we would develop, as presented here today, a new virtual reality paradigm. And I knew by experience that developing a new paradigm is often with ups and downs. We got a lot of people applying for this job, also you, and were very strange times because the applicants were online, so you had to convince us online. And if I remember correctly, the interview, you were quite shy. But you also convinced me that you were determined to get the job done. After interviewing all the participants, I actually contacted your thesis supervisor, Wim Hevers, who said, and I quote him, "Justine has a lot of potential, but there's a growing curve." I thought, okay, this is what we need. I was very convinced and that you were the person for the job. That said, we started the position and the COVID pandemic was widely present in Luxembourg, and starting the planned research was actually impossible. We all worked from home, and we all worked from home and met online at regular moments. You were, however, determined to start in the lab as soon as possible, and despite all the precautions that needed to be taken for COVID, you still succeeded to start your first experimental study. And you did so successful because that ended also up into being your first publication. Yet the big work had to start, the development of a new virtual reality paradigm. And as anticipated, that went with ups and downs. Moments of joy, but also moments of sadness. And I will not go into detail on this, but the fact that you stand here today shows that you have succeeded. Although I will not go into detail on the paradigm development, the lab issues, and many more, I have something else to say. Over the past years, I've learned to take into account the unexpected when meeting with you. Let me explain a bit. I cannot count the number of times that I received a message, sorry, Dimitri, I will not make it today. Or, sorry, Dimitri, I will be later today. And this was numerous times the case because, or there was a train who striked, or if the trains didn't strike, the people fought on your train. If you didn't came by train, a car burned down. I mean, many things happened over the past years. And even on today, well, I had to pick up your paronyms, a jury member, actually to get them here on the PhD. So showing that I'm always prepared for the worst if we need to meet up. Okay, I was a little bit lost in my text. No, what I wanted to say further, even though all these problems happen, I always knew Justine, she will make it. Also today, you made it. You overwon broken computers, crashing, broken screens, and so on, and many more. Yet, this brings me back to the point where I started. You are determined to do whatever it takes to make it happen. And this makes you an asset for every lab. You work hard and always try to improve. This has resulted in a steep learning curve. You have learned a lot over the past years, as you mentioned yourself also, and have become skilled in statistics, virtual reality, eye tracking, and many more. But today, you may have probably overwon your worst fear, presenting your work to people. I still remember your first presentation, and that was only 1 year ago. Indeed, only 1 year ago. COVID had allowed you to avoid presenting for a long time, and I still remember that I really need to push you to give a presentation at RPH a year ago. But today, you again show that you're a quick learner and determined to overcome all obstacles to reach your goal. Over the past years, you did not only work hard. I also have to learn you know as someone who is liked by colleagues and friends. I got stories from colleagues who liked it to chat with you at conferences or who took you at dinner. You are socially engaged and make easily friends, both in Luxembourg as here in Maastricht, also in Ghent. In our talks, I also noticed that you love your family. They're living all around the world, in Ireland, Canada, and also some in Brussels. That's close to me. And that you want to do them proud. I think today you can say, I did them proud. I'm also proud of you about this. Although today is not the end of a period, it's not a goodbye. We decided to keep on working together to get more of the work published. I know it's a risky business, as it may end up in more train strikes, car burns, and so on. But I'm really looking forward to the upcoming meetings and to continue collaboration with you. So, congratulations, Dr. Goris. Now it's time for celebration.
So, dear Dr. Goris, on behalf of Maastricht University, I congratulate you with the degree that you have acquired. A few final remarks. The members of the opposition will talk to you during the reception, but Professor Vögele, of course, cannot come because he is in Luxembourg. So maybe he wants to say something to you.
Well, congratulations, Justine. You've succeeded in conducting a very impressive and challenging series of experiments during a very difficult time. I know because I've been supervising other PhD students over that period of time. So the end result is really very impressive, something you can be proud of. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, and now more final words. So we're going to make a picture of you, a couple of pictures. One with Professor Vögele in the background, so and the total and the committee, and then also on the stairs. And your parents or your direct family is also allowed to watch and take a picture with you. And the others, they can all go immediately to the reception, which is in the Refter, which is over there to the right. Yeah, so that's it.
Thank you very much.